He was 85 years old, and all he wanted that day was a hot cup of coffee in the bar he once owned, a place where the walls still whispered stories of the past, where every creak of the floorboard held memories of laughter, love, and loss. But what unfolded that Wednesday afternoon at Mel's Roadhouse, tucked away near Highway 9, would force an entire town to face its own reflection and ask the question, what does respect truly mean anymore? The jukebox played a dusty country tune barely audible over the quiet chatter and clinking of glasses, and in his usual corner sat Henry Hank Callahan, a retired first sergeant from the United States Marine Corps, dressed in his neatly pressed denim shirt, worn leather boots, and a black veteran cap that had seen more sun than most men see in a lifetime. He came every Wednesday like clockwork for the past 5 years, always at the same hour, always ordering the same plain black coffee, and he would sit in silence. Not because he had nothing to say, but because the world rarely listened to men like him anymore. People saw only an old man, hunched and slow, and failed to see the fire that once burned behind those weathered eyes. The 2 silver bars etched not on his collar but in his soul, earned through decades of guiding young soldiers, through hell and back. That afternoon, the air shifted as 3 bikers slammed open the door, the stench of exhaust and cheap beer trailing behind them, laughter loud and arrogant, their leather vests heavy with patches they had never bled for, and one of them, Itio, tall, broad-shouldered man with contempt carved into his sneer, noticed Hank, smirked, and spat out, "Look at Grandpa Braveheart," nudging his buddy with a mocking chuckle. "Still think you're a hero, old man?" Hank looked up slowly, met his gaze, and said nothing. Not out of fear, but because silence was sometimes the loudest language a Marine could speak. The biker grew more agitated, standing over him now, voice rising. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Are you deaf? Or just senile?" And when Hank simply lifted his coffee, calm and unfazed, the man swatted the cup from his hand, sending it crashing to the floor where it shattered into ceramic shards and silence. Then came the blow, a brutal right hook straight to the cheek, that knocked Hank sideways off the stool. Gasps filled the bar, but no one moved. Not the bartender polishing glasses, not the waitress peeking through the kitchen door, not a single patron, all frozen by fear or indifference, or something worse, cowardice. Hank rose slowly, his hand trembling not from fear but age, reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a phone, and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Son," he said calmly, "it's me. I need you to come." Across town, at Fort Griffin, Colonel Jacob Callahan, Hank's son, was mid-briefing when his encrypted phone vibrated. Seeing the caller ID, he froze. His father never called during duty hours, never without cause. Excusing himself, Jacob stepped into the hall, answered with a clipped, "Dad?" and heard the words, calm but heavy, "I need you." That was all it took. 5 minutes later, a matte black SUV with tactical upgrades and reinforced suspension peeled out of Fort Griffin's south gate, trailed by 2 other unmarked vehicles. Inside sat Jacob, flanked by his elite team, men who knew how to act without asking why, because when a decorated colonel says go, you go. Meanwhile, back at Mel's Roadhouse, Hank had returned to his seat, a fresh bruise blossoming purple under his eye, his jaw stiff, blood at the corner of his mouth. The bikers had resumed their seats, laughing, emboldened by the silence that surrounded them. "Probably calling the nursing home," one jeered. "Maybe they'll wheel him out before he breaks a hip." But Hank didn't react. He just folded his hands and waited. Outside, the weather had changed. Thunderclouds rolled in, casting long shadows over the highway. And then came the sound, low at first, then rising like a distant drumbeat. Engines, heavy, synchronized. The first SUV came into view, screeching to a halt outside the bar, followed by others that parked with military precision. Doors flew open in unison. Out stepped Colonel Callahan, his uniform crisp, his face carved from stone, and behind him 6 men followed. No insignia, no smiles, just purpose etched into every stride. The bar door creaked open. Conversations died. All eyes turned. Jacob scanned the room, found his father, who nodded once. No words needed. The colonel turned to the bar. "Which one?" he asked. Hank raised a single finger. The biker, now unsure, shifted in his seat as Jacob approached. "Brought your fan club, Colonel?" he sneered. "What's the old man gonna do? Hide behind his boy?" Jacob stopped inches from him. "Stand up." The bar held its breath. No music, no laughter, just thick, suffocating tension. The biker smirked. "Got a badge?" Jacob didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a slim black tablet, tapped the screen. A video played. Footage from the security camera. The biker approaching. The cup knocked away. The punch. Hank on the floor. The screen froze on that image. Jacob's voice was ice. "Still feel tough?" The biker stood slowly, the swagger draining from his eyes. I didn't know he was a Marine." "You didn't care," Jacob snapped. Around them, his team had subtly positioned themselves, one near the door, another by the bartender, the rest forming a loose perimeter. No weapons drawn, but their presence was enough. The manager piped up, nervous. "Colonel, maybe we can all calm down. You made it big the moment you let my father get assaulted and did nothing," Jacob fired back. "You asked him to leave instead of removing the man who hit him." Staff went pale. Patrons looked away. Hank, still seated, said nothing, but his eyes watched it all. Not with satisfaction, but with the solemnity of a man who had only ever asked for one thing: dignity. Outside, 2 sheriff units pulled in, summoned by Jacob's second-in-command. Officers entered, viewed the footage, and without hesitation cuffed the biker. No resistance now, just shame. Jacob turned to the bar. "You all saw it, and none of you did a damn thing. My father gave 30 years to this country, and he lay on that floor alone. Not because he needed saving, but because no one had the guts to stand beside him." The silence was deeper than any punch. It wrapped around every soul in the room. Even the pool table in the back lay still, its game unfinished, the cue ball frozen like the moral compass of the town. Jacob returned to Hank's side, knelt. "You okay, old man?" Hank nodded. "Took worse in Nam. Wasn't the punch. That hurt. It was what came after." Jacob clenched his jaw, then turned to the manager. "We didn't come to start a war. But today, you all learned what happens when decency dies in silence." The staff said nothing. Outside, the biker was loaded into a patrol car. Jacob's men stood down. Hank stood too, slowly, painfully, but upright. "I came here every week," he said to the crowd, his voice a gravelly rasp of experience and pain. "Not for the coffee, for the memories. This used to feel like home." He paused. "I wore the uniform for 30 years. I saw men die. I saw this country change. But I never thought I'd live to see a time when people forgot how to respect those who kept it free." Eyes dropped. A man near the jukebox murmured, "I'm sorry, sir." Another added, "We failed. You." Jacob spoke up. Don't apologize. Do better next time. That's how you honor men like him. Everything changed after that. 2 weeks later, Mel's Roadhouse looked different. Gone were the faux military decor items. In their place stood a glass case, center stage, containing a folded American flag, Hank's photo in uniform, and a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of those who stood firm when others did not." It had been donated by local veterans, galvanized by the incident. The story of what happened spread fast, viral online, whispered in cafes, discussed in schools, and more importantly, it stirred something deeper. Veterans began meeting at the bar, turning it into a haven of brotherhood and mentorship. Young patrons came to listen, to really listen, for the first time. Hank was invited to speak at the local high school, where 600 students gave him a standing ovation. He hadn't wanted fame, but now that it came, he used it, not to shame, but to teach. One golden evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Hank and Jacob sat outside the bar sipping lemonade, watching teens place flags along Main Street for Memorial Day. Jacob leaned back. "You started something big, Dad." Hank shook his head. "That biker did. I just reminded people who they were before they forgot." Jacob smiled. "Still, not many your age would have handled it like you did." Hank looked out at the town, voice low. "My war ended decades ago, but it's still my duty to make sure people know why we fought." As they stood to leave, something happened. Every person inside the bar stood. Silence fell. No music, no conversation. One by one, each customer placed their hand over their heart. No one had planned it. No one needed to. Hank paused at the door, eyes wet. For a man who'd spent his life defending respect, it had finally come home, not with cheers, but with dignity.